On the morning of the 28th of March, 2019, a man in his 50s stood at an observation area on the west rim of the Grand Canyon taking photographs. He was part of a tour group, most of the way through a 7-day trip. He stumbled. He went over the edge. A helicopter recovered his body from about 1,000 feet below the rim that afternoon. Almost every report about it mentioned the Skywalk, which is why a spokesman for Grand Canyon West went on the record with what I think is the most revealing sentence anyone has ever said about this place. He told CBS News, plainly, that the man did not fall from the Skywalk. He fell roughly 100 yards from it, from open rim, with nothing between him and the drop. So the title is half right. People do keep dying at Grand Canyon West. What almost nobody gets right is where. In nearly 2 decades and more than 10 million crossings, the glass bridge everyone is afraid of has not killed a single person by accident. No panel failure. No collapse. Nobody has ever gone through the floor. Every death is somewhere else on the property. This channel breaks down why particular places kill people, using the actual record instead of the version that gets repeated about them. If that's what you're here for, subscribe. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what kills visitors at Grand Canyon West, and why it is almost never the thing they queued up terrified of. Start with a problem that shapes everything else in this video. Nobody is counting. The National Park Service publishes a mortality dashboard. It logs deaths across the units it manages, cause by cause, year by year. Grand Canyon West is not in it, because Grand Canyon West is not a national park. It sits on Hualapai tribal land, about 120 miles from Las Vegas, and a long way from the South Rim in every sense that matters. Your park pass is not valid here. The Park Service has no operational role here at all. So, there is no official death toll for this place. None. There is no per-visit fatality figure, because the numerator has never been collected. Anyone who quotes you odds for the Skywalk is making them up. What you can do is count the incidents that were reported by name and cross-check them. Do that from 2001 to 2025, and you get at least 20 people. That is my count. From primary reporting, not an official one. And I want to be honest that it is almost certainly low, because the deaths that make the news are the dramatic ones. Against that, somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million visitors a year, depending on which figure you trust. The Federal Highway Administration and the USDA both use 700,000. An Arizona State University study put it at 1 million. More than 10 million people have crossed the Skywalk since 2007 by the operator's own count. One helicopter company alone flies around 600,000 passengers a year over this canyon. For comparison, and only for comparison, Grand Canyon National Park, a completely separate place, has recorded roughly 200 deaths since 2007, averaging 10 to 17 a year, with medical causes leading and falls second. Those two sets of numbers get merged constantly. The BBC did it. Do not let anyone do it to you, because the mechanisms are not the same, and the difference is the whole story. Here's the thing about Grand Canyon West. It does not feel like the Grand Canyon. It feels like an airport. You arrive at a terminal. You buy a ticket, because this is a commercial destination, not a park. Your private vehicle stops there. You are not permitted to drive further in. Shuttles take you between viewpoints. There are restaurants at 3 of them. Before you walk onto the Skywalk, you pass through a security screening. You empty your pockets into a free locker, and you put fabric covers over your shoes so you do not scratch the glass. Every single one of those cues tells your brain the same thing. Someone is in charge here. Someone has assessed this. Someone would not let you do something fatal. And on the bridge, that is completely true. The Skywalk is the most heavily governed object for 100 miles. Ticketed access, a metal detector, a capacity cap, restrictions on what you may carry, a railing on both sides, and a rule for almost every action you might take. Then you walk off it and the rules stop. That is the idea I want you to hold for the next 20 minutes, because it explains everything that follows. At Grand Canyon West, everything with a rule is safe. Everything without one is still the Grand Canyon. Your brain does not make that distinction. It got its safety reading at the metal detector, and it does not take a second one. So here's what the record actually says. The thing that kills people at Grand Canyon West is transport. Getting there and getting a better view of it from the air. Helicopter tours account for more deaths than every other cause on this site combined. Coaches on the access road account for more than the bridge ever has, and behind those, the falls, not from the engineered structure, but from the unfenced scenic overlooks a short walk away. The mechanism is not exotic, it is jurisdictional. The Skywalk was designed, inspected, and is operated under tight control because it is a manufactured object and its risk is legible. The rim beside it is not a manufactured object, so it has a sign instead of a railing, and the airspace above it is governed under a federal exemption. The Federal Aviation Administration granted the Hualapai relief from the route caps, curfews, and flight limits that apply inside Grand Canyon National Park on economic grounds, because tourism is the tribe's engine. Air tours here are simply not regulated the way air tours over the park are. None of that is visible to you. You cannot see a regulatory boundary. You can only see a glass floor, and it looks terrifying, and it is the safest place you will stand all day. Let's take the causes one at a time, worst first, but not in the order you'd expect. Start with the one that has killed nobody. The Skywalk is a cantilever. It is anchored back into the rim rather than propped up from underneath, which is why there is nothing beneath you when you look down. The walking surface is laminated low-iron glass, multiple bonded layers, so that if one layer cracks, the interlayer holds the pieces rather than releasing them. Laminated glass fails ugly. It does not fail suddenly. In more than 10 million crossings since 2007, there has been no recorded death or injury caused by the structure failing. The operator stated in 2019 that the incident that year was the first fatal incident of any kind involving the Skywalk in all that time, and no reporting has contradicted that. Now, a warning about the numbers you will see quoted for it. 71 fully loaded Boeing 747s, an 8.0 earthquake, 100-mile-an-hour winds, 800 people per panel. I went looking for the engineering report behind those figures, and I could not find one. Every trail leads back to promotional pages and tour operator listings. They may well be accurate, they are not sourced, so I'm not going to repeat them as fact, and neither should the next channel that covers this. The point stands without them. 0. In 10 million crossings. The thing built to be walked on has never been the problem. Which raises an obvious question. If the bridge is fine, what is the rim doing? Grand Canyon West has two other viewpoints, and they are the ones people actually die at. Eagle Point sits about 100 yards from the Skywalk. Guano Point is a narrow finger of rock marketed for its 360-degree views, with a hiking trail, a cafe, and a gift shop on it. Neither has a barrier. Reporting on Eagle Point states it directly. There are ledges and outcroppings below, and nothing between tourists and the edge. Guano Point has no safety railings at all. What both have is signage telling you not to get close. The man in the 2019 incident was at Eagle Point, in a tour group, taking photographs when he stumbled. He was from Hong Kong. Hong Kong's public broadcaster reported he was from Macau and was on a 7-day tour of the West Coast. His name was never released. There are no quotes from him and none from his family. Whether he was taking a selfie was reported by one outlet and not by the wire services, so I'm not going to tell you that he was. What is documented is that he was photographing, that he stumbled, and that the area has no barrier. In November 2025, a 65-year-old man slipped at Guano Point and fell about 130 feet onto a scree pile. Nobody knows what he was doing. There were no witness accounts released, no indication he had a phone in his hand, nothing beyond a slip. And that second fall is the one I keep coming back to, because 130 feet is not the Grand Canyon. It is about 12 stories. It is a drop most people would assume is survivable, onto a slope of broken rock, and it was not survivable. You do not need the 4,000-foot postcard drop to die here. You need one bad step near an edge that has no railing and a cafe behind it. There is a second-order problem with those edges too. The canyon is erosion. The rock beneath the lip can be undercut, so ground that looks continuous can be a thin shelf over nothing. That detail comes from a secondary source rather than a survey, so hold it loosely. But it is consistent with everything else about this landscape. Here's what I want you to notice. Both of those men were, minutes earlier, inside a system that had checked their pockets and put covers on their shoes. Then, they walked to a viewpoint with a gift shop on it, and the system was gone, and nothing told them. The rule stopped there. If you've ever stepped past a warning sign at a viewpoint because the ground looked solid and everyone else was doing it, say so in the comments. I want to see how many of us there are. And drop a like if this is changing how you'd plan a trip like this. Because the part almost everybody gets wrong is still ahead, and it starts before you even reach the canyon. Nobody counts the drive. Grand Canyon West is a Las Vegas day trip, roughly 120 miles each way, and most visitors arrive by chartered coach. That drive is part of the attraction in every practical sense and part of it in the death toll too. In January 2021, a Las Vegas-managed tour bus heading north on Diamond Bar Road toward Grand Canyon West rolled onto its side near milepost 5. 48 people were aboard, including the driver. One passenger, Shelly Ann Vogus, 53, from Boonville, Indiana, was pronounced dead at the scene. 2 more were critically injured and around 40 were hospitalized. No other vehicle was involved. The responding fire chief told the Associated Press that the bus slid a long way, that he'd rate the wreck an 8 out of 10, that nobody was ejected, and that several passengers said the driver had been traveling fast. That last part is a passenger account relayed by a fire chief, not a finding, and I'm not going to present it as the cause. In August 2023, another bus rolled at Grand Canyon West itself, inside the terminal circle after a collision. 57 people were involved. 1 woman died. 8 were flown to hospital, and more than 50 were injured. That one happened in a car park. But the detail that genuinely stopped me is smaller than either crash. The Federal Highway Administration documented 2 separate fatal head-on collisions on Diamond Bar Road, both at almost exactly the same spot. About 7/10 of a mile from the junction with Pierce Ferry Road, at the first curve after you turn onto the road. Both involved drivers who were completely unimpaired. One was Irish, one was Australian. They drifted into the oncoming lane. The FHWA's assessment was that they were inexperienced at driving on American roads, where oncoming traffic passes on the driver's side rather than the passengers, and that the first bend was where the old habit reasserted itself. Mojave County's fix was an oversized 2-way traffic warning sign on both sides of the road and painted arrows in each lane. Total cost, materials and labor, $871. Afterwards, the county recorded 0 crashes of that type across the entire 14-mile road. 2 people died because a road they had never driven had a curve on it. $871 closed the gap. It's worth remembering that this road was unpaved until 2014, and when it was finally sealed, the story was about comfort. The end of flat tires, cracked windscreens, hubcaps lost in the desert. Nobody framed it as a safety change. A smoother road is also a faster road. Which brings us to the part of the day people pay extra for. Air tours are the premium upgrade at Grand Canyon West. They are also, by a wide margin, the deadliest thing that happens there. And the reason is not that helicopters fly over the canyon, it's that here they fly into it and land at the bottom. In September 2003, a Sundance helicopter's flight was carrying 6 passengers from the helipad at Grand Canyon West Airport at 4,775 feet, down to a helipad beside the Colorado River at 1,300 feet. That is a descent of nearly 3,500 feet through a canyon, on a route called Descent Canyon. The aircraft struck a canyon wall while maneuvering. The pilot and all 6 passengers were killed. The National Transportation Safety Board attributed it to the pilot's disregard of safe flying procedures and misjudgment of the helicopter's proximity to terrain. In February 2018, an Airbus EC-130, operated by Papillon Grand Canyon Helicopters, came in to land at a site called Quartermaster on a plateau, roughly 3,300 feet below the rim. Quartermaster is a dirt landing area about 600 feet by 150, with no marked pads and no painted touchdown zones. This aircraft was the 9th of 10 scheduled to land there that afternoon. 7 people were aboard, the pilot and 6 British passengers who were in Nevada, celebrating a 30th birthday. The NTSB's probable cause was a loss of tail rotor effectiveness, the pilot's subsequent loss of control, and collision with terrain during an approach in gusting tailwind conditions, in an area of potential downdrafts and turbulence. Investigators found no evidence of any mechanical fault. The machine was working, the air was not. 3 passengers died at the scene. Becky Dobson, 27. Stuart Hill, 30. Jason Hill, 32. 2 more, Jonathan Udall and Ellie Millward, died later of their injuries. 5 dead out of 7. And here is the part that turns a survivable crash into a fatal one. The helicopter was not fitted with a crash-resistant fuel system because it was not required to have one. 2 of the 5 deaths came afterwards, in hospital, from burns. I want to be careful here, because there is nothing in the record about what anyone on board thought, said, or experienced. No passenger quotes exist. The pilot's account survives only as investigators paraphrase. Everything beyond the report is invention, and this is exactly the kind of story that gets invented. Count the aviation deaths in this corner of the canyon, and you get at least 12 across those 2 crashes alone. A 3rd crash in 2001 killed 6 more in what reporting describes as the same general area. I can't place it precisely enough inside the Grand Canyon West operation to fold it in cleanly, so treat 18 as the outer figure and 12 as the one you can stand on. Either way, it is more than everything else combined. The upgrade is the risk. 2 other categories belong in the record, briefly and honestly. At least 3 deaths at Grand Canyon West were suicides. 1 in September 2019 from the Skywalk, confirmed as such by the operator. 1 in August 2022 on the property. 1 in June 2023 from the Skywalk, which the sheriff's office did not formally classify, but which it handled as one. After the 2019 death, Grand Canyon West said publicly it would look at whether new policies and additional security were needed alongside its existing barriers. I'm raising it for one reason. The only fatal incidents on the bridge itself are of this kind, and they are routinely relabeled as accidents by content that wants a scarier bridge. That relabeling is not harmless, and it is worth refusing. Then there is heat, which I can describe but cannot count. Grand Canyon West sits on a plateau at about 4,790 feet, roughly 2,200 feet lower than the south rim. Lower means hotter. This is the warmest and driest of the 3 rims, with summer highs commonly above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Visitors queue outdoors for shuttles and for the bridge, and the operator's own guidance puts peak Skywalk crowding between 11 and 3, the hottest part of the day. You cannot bring your own food or drink onto the site, so hydration depends on buying it there. No heat death at Grand Canyon West could be sourced. I am not going to claim one. But standing in an unshaded queue at 105 degrees after 2.5 hours on a coach is a genuine physiological load, and it is being carried by people who think they're at a viewpoint rather than in a desert. Which is the thing about this place. The causes don't sit in separate boxes. Look at what a single visitor actually does in one day. They fly into Las Vegas, sleep badly, and board a coach at dawn. They drive 2.5 hours on a road with a curve that has already killed 2 people. They arrive dehydrated at a site hotter and drier than the canyon they've seen in photographs. They queue in direct sun. They pass through security, put covers on their shoes, and walk out over a 4,000-foot void that has never hurt anybody, which teaches them, wordlessly, that this whole place is engineered. Then, they walk 100 yards to a viewpoint with a cafe and no railing, take out a phone, and step backwards to fit the canyon in frame. Some of them will get in a helicopter and descend 3,000 feet into a canyon to land on unmarked dirt. No single element of that day is reckless. Every element is normal. What stacks is the margin. Heat takes some. Fatigue takes some. The security theater at the bridge takes the largest slice of all because it spends your caution in the one place you didn't need it. Everything with a rule is safe. Everything without one is still the Grand Canyon, and by the time you reach the part without rules, you've already handed in your suspicion at the door. Now think about what your own head is doing on that day, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. You are not making a risk assessment at Grand Canyon West. You made one at the terminal, and you have been coasting on it ever since. A ticket booth, a shuttle, a security screening, and a staff member handing you shoe covers are 4 separate signals that a professional has walked this ground and made it survivable. Your brain reads that as a blanket. It does not read it as a boundary. The bridge deepens the illusion rather than correcting it. It concentrates every visible safety control in the one place where the actual risk is nearly zero, and it does that so convincingly that visitors arrive at Eagle Point in a state of managed calm. The operator's own guidance now permits phones on the Skywalk with a warning. Take selfies at your own risk, and do not extend your arm over the railing. Note that phrase. There is a railing to not lean over. At the viewpoints, there is a sign, and the Diamond Bar road cases show the failure mode more clearly than anything else at this site, because those drivers were not careless. They were unimpaired, unhurried, and competent everywhere else in their lives. What killed them was a habit. 30 years of oncoming traffic passing on the other shoulder, reasserting itself at the first bend of an unfamiliar road. That is not recklessness. That is a body doing what it always does, in a place where what it always does is wrong. Ask yourself honestly what you do. You've paid for the ticket. You've been on the coach since 6. You have one shot at this photograph. There's a family already standing where you want to stand, so the edge looks proven. Nobody has stopped you all morning. You would step forward. So would I. That is the point. And the reason that matters so much here is what happens next, because at Grand Canyon West, the response is not what you're imagining. There are no rangers. Grand Canyon West has no operational tie to the National Park Service, so nobody in a flat hat is coming. Response is assembled. Hualapai Nation Police, Hualapai Nation Fire, Bureau of Indian Affairs Police, Grand Canyon West Security, and Mojave County Sheriff's Office Search and Rescue, an all-volunteer unit of somewhere between 100 and 130 people covering an entire county. They are good at this, but look at what rescue means physically. When the man fell at Guano Point in 2025, recovering him meant technical rope technicians building a lowering and raising system to reach a body 130 feet down a scree pile. When the man fell at Eagle Point in 2019, it meant a helicopter lifting him from 1,000 feet below the rim. These are engineering operations, not ambulance calls. And at the bottom of the canyon, it gets worse. After the 2018 crash, the Hualapai police chief said the only ways to reach the site were a 20-mile hike or a helicopter, and that responders needed night vision equipment to work the scene. Then the weather closed it. 50-mile-an-hour gusts, darkness, and dust made evacuation impossible. Survivors, several with severe burns, had to be stabilized on the rocks until conditions allowed a flight. They were not moved out until around 2 in the morning. The crash had happened at 5:20 the previous evening. That is roughly 8.5 hours on the canyon floor. You will not be billed for the rescue itself. Mojave County states that all search and rescue in the county is provided by the sheriff at no charge under Arizona statute, specifically so that people call for help rather than delaying. Air ambulance billing is a separate question, and I could not source an answer. The cost was never the problem, the clock is. So who actually dies here? The documented ages run from 27 to 65. 27, 28, 30, 32, 33. A man in his 50s, 53, 65. The falls and the suicides are all reported male. Both bus fatalities were women. Look at the nationalities and the pattern gets sharper. British on a birthday trip. A man from Hong Kong or Macau on a packaged West Coast tour. Japanese and German passengers in the 2003 helicopter. An Irish driver and an Australian driver on the same curve of the same road. And look at where they were. Eagle Point, Guano Point, the Terminal Circle. Milepost 5 on the access road, the airport to river helicopter route. Not one source death at Grand Canyon West is a backcountry fatality. Not one is a hiker who went too far. There is no summit here to get fixated on and no trail to be underprepared for. These were people who bought a ticket, boarded a coach, and were never planning to be in wilderness at all. That is what makes this different from every other Grand Canyon story you've heard. In the national park, the classic victim is someone who overestimated their fitness on a trail with a warning sign at the top of it. Here, preparation was never the variable because nobody ever told them preparation was required. They were customers. The brochure said viewpoint. The ground said canyon. You do not have to be reckless to end up in that gap. You only have to believe the brochure, which is what a brochure is for. Grand Canyon West is not a trap, and it is not badly run. The Skywalk is a genuinely impressive piece of engineering, and the record shows it has protected everyone who has ever stood on it. That's the strange, quiet tragedy of the place. It works exactly as designed, and in working, it teaches 10 million people that this landscape has been made safe for them, when what has actually been made safe is one glass horseshoe and nothing on either side of it. Everything with a rule is safe. Everything without one is still the Grand Canyon. The canyon isn't hostile. It isn't anything. It simply carries on being a 4,000-foot drop, with a cafe at the top of it, indifferent to how thoroughly you were screened on the way in. That's the thing I can't get past about this one. Not the crashes, not the falls, but the fact that nobody is officially counting any of it. The Park Service dashboard stops at a boundary you can't see, and on the other side of that line, the deaths are just news stories that fade. A place cannot fix a pattern it has never had to add up. Tell me which of these surprised you most: the helicopters, the road, or the $871 sign. And tell me which place I should take apart next. If you want the real reasons these landscapes kill people, rather than the stories that get told about them, subscribe.